Great. I'm pretty sure we're recording now. Sweet. All right. So implementing wireframes. Wireframes. I can't do it. All right. What else we got? Any other questions? All wireframes all day. Yeah. Write a test script to test one or more functions in source code file. What does that mean, in source code file? Is that actually copied from the module? Are you quoting the module? Who wrote that? Yeah, okay, which module are you talking about?
It's super simple testing.
Ah, yes, I wrote that one. Not so simple, eh? Okay. Write a test to test one or more functions in the source code file. Ah, I know what I meant by that. Yeah. Yeah, okay. This is poorly worded. I'll reword that. Okay. And you had a question, right?
No, because Kevin was saying that you prefer expect.
Oh, yeah, we can talk about that, though. Expect versus assert versus should. Yeah, okay. Let's do that one first because it's super quick. So cool. Okay, so expect, assert, and should. These are all options that come from Chai, but they're not new. They are patterns that have been around for a long time. The should one probably hasn't been around that long. I think it came out of Ruby, but let's talk about the difference of them. Because when you use Chai, it's going to offer you these three syntaxes: should, expect, and assert. So let's look at those two. I don't know if it records me zooming in here, so I'm going to do this. Oh, yeah. Let's get some better sound here. Let's stop sharing so I can make sure. Okay, cool. I think I'm good. Boop, boop. All right, let's go back to sharing my screen. All right, so let's look at the one that I recommend, which is the expect one here. So we get this expect function. And in order to make any assertion at all, we have to say expect something. We have to have a target. We have to have some single object that we're talking about, right? And so this puts all of the assertion logic and code around asserting something into one place. So we say expect, we have to do that first, and then we can have all this power of saying .to, whatever, right? This assert version is pretty similar in that all of the logic around asserting things and making sure that things are working the way that we want in our tests is all in one place, right? So the difference between these two is this one uses chaining, right? You can say expect foo to be a string, and I think they even have more flexibility where you can say expect foo to be a string and to not be a number and to be greater, to have length greater than blah, right? I think you can chain assertions, right? So there's a chaining thing here that I really like. It provides more of an English readable sentence here. It also gives expect a lot of context around what exactly. There's a lot of keywords in here, right? To have property, to have length of. This allows expect to give you really nice error messages. Assert has a lot of that, but it has basically everything is just a single method off of the assert. So assert's just an object that gives you a bunch of kind of, I guess they're probably even in a little way standalone methods where it's like assert something and it has to have a thing for you to assert. Whereas expect can kind of do a little bit of composure by combining different methods together, right? So you can do a little bit more with the chaining here. But I like both of these a lot because they keep all this logic in one place, unlike should. So you can see the difference here. In both expect and assert, we require a thing. Well, we actually just take it off of the Chai object, right? But in the should example, we actually call a should function in order to enable should. And that's that's a major difference. So should requires initialization. There has to be something, we have to tell the system, I want to use should. And the reason we have to do that is because we're not referencing chai at all here in our code. Oh God. What we're doing is every single object in all the language now has been extended to have a should function on it, or a should object on it.
Every language.
No. Every object in the language, right? So when I call chai should, it's doing some magic to go into every single object and give it this should property, right? And so that's really aggressive. That goes in and actually changes our code, right? It changes what properties are accessible on our objects. And what if I was writing code where I had a should property? Now I can't use should to assert something, right? So it really blurs the lines for me of like, I want to separately say, here's where I'm doing an assertion. It's all about it requires that I start with this expect thing. It's very explicit. Here, I could accidentally put this in my actual code outside of my tests, and then it might fail in the real world but succeed in my tests, right? So we're having too much of an effect on the world, in my opinion, when we use something like should. Although, you know, it makes for like a pretty clean syntax, right? Foo.should.have length of 3, right? But I don't think it's that much better than expect foo to have, right? So this is something that came, I think, out of the Ruby world, where Ruby has this, it makes it really easy to add methods to every object and to extend all kinds of things. JavaScript, it's actually a little challenging. I bet you there's a couple of cases where should isn't going to work exactly how you want it to. Although I can't think of those off the top of my head at the moment. So I recommend y'all stay with expect or assert. Assert is actually a fine tool to use. It's a little simpler than having to understand this chaining thing. It's probably a little bit more discoverable because you could just look at what properties are on assert and it will tell you everything you can assert, right? Whereas expect, I really have to go to the docs, because even if I say, you know, log everything that's on the expect object, it's probably going to tell me just there's a to and a not or something like that, right? What I really like about expect is, and they don't have an example of it here, which they should, which is that you can take any one of these and you can just negate them. You can say expect these to not, and it just flops them, right? And so assert, I'm not exactly sure how you do that. Expect it to not equal. There's probably a not equal, right? They may. I actually don't know. I don't use assert, so maybe they also do have a dot not, and maybe this is moot. But I really like that part of expect. I pretty much always use expect. Yeah, it makes the most sense to me. Yeah. Cool. So that's my spiel on that. Let's do this implementing wireframes. Which module was this about?
This is HTML, CSS,
This one? Mockups and wireframes?
Yeah.
Sweet. And which exercise are you doing?
We built HTML, CSS for Google.
For Boogle. Cool. Got it. Cool. So how would we implement this wireframe? So wireframes are intended to be they're intended to be ambiguous on purpose, right? You can kind of see that like all of these lines are like squiggly lines, right? They're meant to not be sharp, right? You can see that these lines here, they're kind of wiggly, right? And the reason they do that is because if I give you a wireframe where it looks high resolution, it looks like there actually is specific detail, right? Let's say I took a screenshot of this part of the Slack window, right? If I gave you this as a wireframe, I would probably implement this as exact as possible. I would get as pixel perfect as I could. I would assume that you gave me this resolution on purpose. You want me to implement exactly that. But if you give me a mock-up like this, I can assume that you don't actually want me to try to implement all this jaggedy line stuff, right? This is meant to express to you kind of a back of the napkin sketch of what the page should look like. And this is often in an environment where you already have a tool set or a visual vocabulary for what your site should look like, right? So if Google says, okay, this is our new homepage, a Google employee is going, Google employee is going, TM, is going to look at this and they're going to know these are our standard buttons. These aren't some weird new thing I need to make, right? These are our standard links. They look how the links are supposed to look. So this is supposed to be a low resolution, low fidelity communication of what things should look like, right? You're supposed to take some, not exactly artistic license, but you're supposed to be familiar with the existing visual vocabulary of your site and try to apply that as best you can. So in this case, we're asking you to implement this, but we don't have like a visual vocabulary that we're giving you alongside it, right? So you might we might want to add like implement these wireframes using the Foundation CSS framework or using the Bootstrap framework, because if we go look at, say, Foundation CSS, and we look at their documentation, docs, sites, they have an emails thing. So we have a bunch of like we have a visual vocabulary here, right? We've got some typography that's standardized throughout our, right? This is what all headers look like. So I can assume this is probably just our standard H1, right? If we look at some controls, I assume buttons are in here. We should probably use some of these standard buttons in place of here, and our links should be here. And there might even be a component or something already made to do this inline list with a pipe separating each one, right? So that's how I would read these wireframes, is take your existing website's visual vocabulary and try to apply whatever existing components and things to this wireframe. And if there's anything new, it should prompt like a dialogue between you and the designers to get a higher resolution idea of what those things can look like. And if you can't get that conversation right away, just kind of take your best shot at it, and there'll generally be some sort of polishing round for that. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a high level of like how I would approach looking at these wireframes. This module does not say that you should implement these wireframes using a specific framework, but I think I'm going to add that.
Oh, good. So we can get ready.
I mean, I want you to practice these things. It's very important that you practice CSS from scratch and that you understand what a reset style sheet is, and you understand how to implement things like this kind of a button, right? It's not sufficient, in my opinion, for you to only have experience using frameworks and using existing code or existing CSS stuff, because you won't know enough about the fundamentals to not break other things and to not step on other parts of those frameworks, right? If you can get and most of these frameworks are so complete, you're just going to be adding class names to HTML. You're not going to be necessarily writing too much CSS, right? So it's very important. So what I'll probably do is add to this module that like you should implement them in like pure CSS and then also in like a Bootstrap or a Foundation, just to get an idea of what the difference is between implementing those things. So I'm going to write that down real quick. Cool. Yeah.
Is Grid or Flexbox considered a framework?
This is like, it's so funny. This is a common misunderstanding that I keep hearing here, that people think Flexbox is some other thing, right? Just, you know, all CSS, it's just a core part of CSS. It's built into CSS. Now, CSS is a moving target like JavaScript is, right? The different browsers implement different things. So if you want to answer this kind of question on your own, icanuse.com will tell you like what browsers support what CSS features, right? Or not, it's can I use, not I can use. Caniuse.com. So we can come in here and we can look at Flexbox. And if it's not in here, it's probably not a built-in to browsers, right? This is a browser compatibility checking website. So we're pretty much all over the place with Flexbox these days. But you asked about Grid, and I don't know what Grid is. I assume there's a CSS framework called Grid. There's a million grids out there, but those are all those are all CSS things, right? When you ask, are they libraries? Is that what your question was? Are they libraries?
I guess the explanation I heard was that Flexbox is for your items, like it'll grow and shrink your items. However, if you want your layout to be very responsive specific, then you would use Grid because it targets like the space.
I mean, I think that's a really general statement, and that has so many exceptions. I think that might be a good general rule to follow for how you want to think about where to apply those tools. But I don't think but that sounds too restrictive to me. Flexbox is a tool. It's actually very it's got a lot of options. You can do a lot of things with it. There's a lot of really tricky layouts and situations that you can create using that tool. Does it fully replace a grid? Not exactly. And now the word grid is a nebulous thing too, right? It's implemented in a bunch of different ways by different places. Now, probably the de facto standard would be Bootstrap's grid, right? Bootstrap has a grid that's based on creating rows and then giving elements some sort of column percentage, right? And then a column percentage based on the size your browser is. So they define like sort of extra small, small, medium, large, extra large kind of thing. And those are sort of built around what those sizes are built around different devices, right? Like an old small iPhone is going to be extra small. Maybe the iPhone 6S is going to be small versus a massive displayed monitor would be extra large, right? So they've kind of figured out what the right borders are, but then you just say like, okay, here's a row, and these three things are on a small screen, they're 100% of the row, so they sit on top of each other, right? They flow vertically. But on an extra large screen, they take up a third of the width, right? So now they're sitting horizontally, right? And you do this all just by adding classes to things. So that's one way to implement a grid. There's a bunch of other grids that you can even implement a grid using Flexbox, right? So there's a bunch of stuff out there that you can read about on how to implement different grids. There's a lot of grids that are designed on using a specific fixed set of columns. So you do there's probably like a 390 grid or something like that. What is that thing? 390 grid or something. I think that's it. A 960 grid. Yeah, this is a standard grid that I've used before where it's not based on percentage like Bootstrap is. It's based on how many columns, right? So this comes from newspaper layout design where it's like, okay, we've got a fixed width and we want vertical alignment on things, plus we want this border. So like, do we want it to fall on this line or this line, and how many grid elements are there, and do we want to offset them? So this is another grid system that works fundamentally differently, right? So it's really a loose term, and you should look at the actual implementation of these things and see how they're working and how they're laying out, and play around with them if you have time. But you'll end this is probably an old style way of doing things. I'm not sure that this 960 grid has very many responsive. I actually don't know how it works responsively. I know Bootstrap's grid works pretty well, but it's all very implementation specific. But a grid is basically, a grid system in general is just a way to have class names that allow you to lay out how your page flows and looks and where things are based on different sizes, right? Or different responsive sizes. But yeah, all that stuff's not going to be a built-in to the language. It's not going to be a built-in to CSS, right? It's going to be a library of some kind. I don't think there's any grid stuff built into CSS.
I have to double check the thing that I read then.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, Well, yeah, I'm happy to look at that thing too if you want to send it to me.
Okay.
I do
Yeah.
know because I was working on this like 2 or 3 days ago. Just like you can set display to flex, you can also set display to grid.
Oh, is there a
There's
display
built-in
grid?
system,
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Is it supported?
You can make
Okay, it's pretty supported. It just has a little, it's a little broken in Microsoft's latest browser, but it looks well supported. Okay, I've never used this. What is it?
and then you can set like different areas and make the sizes of those areas and set the classes to be in those areas.
Okay, great. I take it back. I have not seen this before. I've not used this before. This looks pretty sweet.
Made Flexbox Rugby, also made a game called Break Guard.
Okay,
If
great.
you guys want to learn grid, I can put a link in.
That would be great.
Cool. So be careful though, because if you and you need to check this stuff on Can I Use, because if your company supports Internet Explorer or even a slightly older Internet Explorer, right? Or even iOS Safari, right? If someone's on an old version of iOS, this is going to break for them, right? So this thing's fairly new, it looks like, and it's not, it's not great. It's not as good as Flexbox. What's that number? Right, that's up in the 90s right now. So this is really important to keep in mind, because any website that you work on, you're gonna want to be aware of, and any company you work at, if they're not doing this, they really should be aware of what browsers and what browser versions are you aiming to support, because there's a lot of features that didn't exist in older versions, right? Cool. So does that cover what you wanted to cover? Or do you want to go through implementing the grid?
What's that?
Or did you want to implement the wireframe?
That would be cool.
Okay.
If not today, then like a lecture on implementing
Okay.
wireframe.
So yeah, well, other than just like actually going through the HTML and CSS that I would write to accomplish this specific wireframe or this specific wireframe, is there anything about the sort of meta implementing of a wireframe that you have more questions about? Like
The meta,
like the process of like, I can talk about what I would do to start breaking this down, right? If that would be helpful. Let's go into preview here, and I'll start marking up this file. So if it were me, I would assume show markup toolbar, right? I would assume that this part of this is just the browser Chrome, right? I don't need to implement that, and so is probably this gray part at the bottom here. So I can forget about that part and think just about my page. Why is that gray? Oh, okay, whatever. Great. So I can forget about that stuff. And now I'm going to make some assumptions. And then a lot of this is just based on my experience both using the web and building websites for a long time, right? So try to draw on what you've seen from other websites to try to stay with what you think the user would expect. So I assume this is a header. It's going to stay at the top. So I'm probably put this in its own div. I can't stroke. This thing with a transparent background. Cool. So I would plan on making this element. Let's do that. There we go. I would plan on making this a single element, and then I think this part is probably all going to be wrapped in one big element here. And this thing, yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. Yeah, and then this down here would probably be a footer. And then I'm not sure. I would look at some of my other other pages on this site to see if maybe this part is like in a column, right? So I'm not sure if this is in like a fixed width column or what is giving this its centeredness, right? But also, is it restricted, right? Because some websites, I guess even if we go to Google and search, that's not a good search. they keep things in a column, right? Let's say I was on a smaller, much bigger monitor, right? All the content is kept from being way too wide, right? So that's like a single column approach. A lot of websites have a single fixed column. There's a maximum size at which, because no one wants to read like a paragraph that's all in one line, right? So it's common to do that. So that's something I would be curious about, or if not, then this is going to be one big thing, right? And then we can display center all these things, but then maybe how am I going to do this? Am I going to absolute position this to the right? I'd start thinking about that kind of thing. And I'd start thinking about the tree structure that I would write to create this sort of thing. And I would kind of just break it down that way, and then just start tackling one by one. Yeah. So there, I don't know. Wireframes aren't really going to tell you about any interaction that you need to do. Maybe if it's a series of wireframes, we might start doing some behavioral JavaScript stuff. But I absolutely would start with, I'd get the basics here. Let's just do it. Let's just do it because I'm just going to talk about it. What? How do I not have that? Okay, so I would start with the overall layout of my page. So in the real world, you're probably going to have an existing layout in your application, and you're going to get a wireframe that's usually just something that's like the Chrome of your website, doesn't change from page to page. So this is probably a little bit more than you'd have to do in the real world, but we're going to be doing the entire page for this wireframe, right? But usually we would have our layout implemented than the individual content of the page. But we'll do it this way. So I'll make a header. I think I'll call it nav. So I'm going to start with the main layout of my page. And I'm just going to do that. And then I'm going to, I need to link my style sheet. Okay. And then in my style sheet, I would actually start by, again, since we're doing from scratch, I would do like a reset style sheet and stuff. But again, a lot of that's going to be done for you for a vast majority of the wireframes you're doing, unless you're doing like a whole new, brand new site, which is pretty rare to do. But just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to get normalized CSS from a CDN, just for the purposes of this talk. And I'm going to link to that first. So this is going to be an essential part of web development in modern CSS development, is having a reset style sheet, so that we reduce all of our browsers to being the same base CSS, because we don't want to start on a different foundation. And then I'll come in here and I'll give some styles just to these main elements. I'll say nav, header, or main, and footer. And I'm going to give them all a background color of just something bright and contrasty, so I can see the difference of what's going on, right? And I've done this, and we're not seeing anything yet. And my guess is we're not seeing anything because these things don't have a height. So I'm just going to give them a quick, probably temporary minimum height. And now we start seeing some content on the page, right? So this is probably a sticky footer, right? I assume, looking at this wireframe, that if I were to make the page bigger, and I'll show you because this is a copy of Google, that if I make the page bigger, the content stays there, but the footer stays at the bottom, right? Does that make sense? Right, so a sticky footer is pretty easy to implement using Flexbox, so I'd start there, right? I'm starting kind of at the top layer of building the big main boxes, and then I'm going to get in more detail, right? So I know that I'm going to use Flexbox to get this sticky footer, so I'm going to make the body display flex, flex direction column, right? Because we want them to be rows. And then yeah, and then this is going to be not. This is not going to grow or shrink. This is a shorthand for flex grow 0 and flex shrink 0, right? So this box should stay 100 pixels high. The main content, however, I do want to grow and shrink, and then we'll do that. So now we should see that, oh, it's not doing exactly what I want, and that is because by default, and this is a wacky thing, by default, the body element, which is meant to contain everything you see, doesn't grow to the full size of the viewport, of the viewable part of the page, right? The HTML part and the body part, you can see, are not this white part, right? When I hover over, right? So a default that I always like to add, and you'll see this in a lot of places, is just that the body's minimum height should be 100 view heights. That means its minimum height is going to be the viewport height. And now we're getting that sticky footer. So I've made these, this is probably a country's flag at this point. But I've made the basics of what I think is going on here, right? The next thing I do, let's assume we're going to do that centered column, is I would do that next. So I put another thing in here. I don't know what I'll call it, so I'll give it a class name that's specific to, I don't know, main column, or maybe just a page column, so that could be a little reusable. And so now I have to style that. So I'm going to give it another background color of purple, and I'm going to say its max width is, I don't know, 1,000 pixels. And its min width is, oh, we don't need to give it a min width. We don't want it to grow or shrink because I'm going to use another layer of Flexbox. I'm going to make the yellow box here the main box. It's also going to be display flex, and it's going to be flex direction row because this will be this page column inside of it's going to be a column.
What is the display text flex is?
Display flex?
Yeah.
That turns on Flexbox for this. Just for this thing, right?
So if you turn it on in the main container, it doesn't really turn it on like cursor or.
Say that again.
If you turn it on in the main container, it doesn't.
It's just for the turning on Flexbox just means for the element. It doesn't cascade down. Yeah. So let's look at what's going on here. I've got my main. And for some reason, my div is sitting up here and it's got 0 height. And I was expecting it to have height. So now I have to look up Flexbox because I can't remember how you say stretch the whole inner content. So I'm going to go to this. This is the best guide ever. And why is this so shrunk? This thing is what I'm talking about. Where'd it go? This thing right here, right? I want it to stretch. I want it to align item stretch. So let's look at that. Align item stretch. No, it's still not causing this box.
You know what?
Oh, did I? Oh, here's my part. I put class name. I'm stuck with React in my brain. Oh, that didn't fix it either. Why are you not as high as I want you to be? Why is this all on the, damn you ads? So this is the thing I'm talking about. I want my children to vertically be stretched. Let's just play around because I'm not sure what's going on. So I'm just going to come in the console here and I'm just going to play with a few things. Maybe it has something to do with align content. So this is one thing I like to do is I'll just kind of go through the built-ins, and it's applying these, and I can see those aren't doing anything. So that's not what I'm looking for. Why is this not? What if I just give this a height 100%? I don't like that though. This has a 0 height and a 0 width. What if I give this thing a min width? That's probably it. No? Why are you not? Let's just do that now so I can see it. I'm just going to do this temporarily. I think we need the min width. And I'm going to give it a min height temporarily because I'm not sure why I'm not seeing this thing. We definitely want this to be in the center. So it's not that. I do want align item stretch. But I want it to sit in the center now. How do I do that? How do I do that? Justify content. That's how I do that. Nope. Huh. Oh, it's on the wrong element. It should be on main. There we go. Okay. So main needs justify content center. And there we go. Okay, so now we have a center column that should grow. No, it's staying 600 pixels. It's actually should. It should be like that. So we'll probably give this a different value depending on a responsive, like a at media query to give this a different size. But let's just plan for big screens, and we're gonna look like that. Maybe it is 1,000 pixels. Let's just go with that. So now I've built sort of the main pieces of my layout here, right? And I can start filling in the content, right? If I make this really small, it's going to be there. Yeah. And so maybe another big piece is inside of here. We're going to have an H1 that says Google. So we'll get that on the page. And we know that this main page column is going to be text align. What is wrong with me? Oh, it's going to be, why can't I remember this? Text align center, right? Text align. I'm wrong. CSS text align. How do I not remember this? Jesus. Yeah. Text align. Why is that not? That's so weird that this is not. Oh, missing a freaking semicolon. I thought I was going crazy. Okay. So we get that text align center, and the H1 in here is probably going to need some top margin to push it down. You know, so does that give you an idea of how I start and how I go through this? So because CSS has this cascading thing where styles cascade down, I think it's really important to build things from the top down. And it's very important to make sure that when you're looking at oddities and you're like, okay, why is this not the way I want it to be, that you make sure that you're looking at what's being inherited here and how the cascade is happening. That you're looking at the computed styles and seeing exactly what's being applied to this thing. What is the actual end result of the styles? Is the computed styles, and then how we got there. What was the inheritance tree? What overrided what, right? Font size 2EM is being overridden by the same style, but on a different declaration, right? So you want to be able to read this to make sure that that your problem isn't that you inherited some style that you just need to not inherit, or you need to adjust so it doesn't cascade down the way it is, right? So I start top down, and I build the basic shapes, and I give them bright colors. Another trick that I do, instead of these background colors things, which I like, let's say I wasn't doing that, is I'll do a temporary style where I just do like star, and I'll say outline 1 pixel dotted red or something like that. And the reason I use and that gives a border to everything, but it gives a special kind of border that doesn't have any effect on the way things lay out. The outline will not affect the size or shape or width or anything like that, so I can safely turn this on and off. And you can do this on other web pages too, right? I can go to Google and be like, what do the shapes of the things look like? And I can give every element. Oh, not this. You want to do plus star, and then there we go. So now I can outline everything, and I can kind of get a basic idea of like what are the shapes of stuff on this website.
What's it called?
You just apply an outline to every single element. So again, if I go into the Elements tab and I hit plus, and I do star, and then I hit enter, you have to click here, and you can paste outline in there. So you'll see that I have that here, and that's a temporary thing. They add it to the inspector style sheet. And that's just a way to kind of visually see what's going on the page. What are the boxes?
So you went to elements, you hit plus, and then you hit the star.
Yep. I typed star for the selector name. Star all elements, right? Cool. Is that good?
Yeah.
Sweet. Can write a test script. So this was meant to be like the very first kind of testing, right? So let's say I've got a library in here called,
I was just going to say.
oh yeah, sorry. Let's say we're making anything at all. Let's say we're making, what should we make? We're just gonna make a Magic Panda today. Great, we're making the Magic Panda library, and so module.exports equals Magic Panda, right? And let's say Magic Panda is a function that does something, and I want to write some tests for it, right? One way we can do this is, and this is kind of an old school way to do this, this is like without any framework or anything like that, is we can just put tests at the bottom of the file for the thing that we're writing. So we can just come down here and put a break here and just do some tests. So I'll probably do some tests inside of an IFE, right? So I'll do that so that I can have some private variables in here just for the sake of testing, right? So I'll just do like, okay, we've got, let's say Magic Panda is going to be a construct. Well, let's just say, let's get even simpler here. Whatever. This is ridiculous. In this case, no. Nothing in here. This looks, does this shape look weird to you? Okay. It's just, oh, the I'm sorry. Yeah. I am. Yeah, Node supports a lot of these features. So Node supports some of the ES 2017 features or whatever it is. Yeah. Yeah, Node supports these things. And this is a Node library, so it's totally fine. You don't have to Babel, transpile, any of that stuff.
Well, I know, but like, you know, it seems, is it finds each response to like a function, not an arrow function?
This is not replaced in ES6. The arrow functions do not replace functions. They are different things, and they are used for specific things, and they do not cover each other's full usefulness. They have their own. So we can add that to the questions if you want. Great. Let's say for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to switch this to to an add function, right? Let's change this. We're going to move Magic Panda to just math.js. Let's say we didn't have a math, and we're going to make a math now. Right, and we want to write some tests for math, right? So down here, we're just going to say console.log or console.assert math.add And then we can say node math, and it's going to run those assertions. So if I messed up my add function, it's going to throw an error. So that's all that I meant was like at the bottom of your file, write some tests for the thing that you wrote. There's one thing you want to make sure you do, right? Because we don't want to run these tests every time someone requires this, right? We just want to run it when we're testing it, right? So one trick, this is an old school trick, is that you run the tests if someone executes this file directly, but not if they require that file. So one simple way you can do that in Node is say if require.parent exists, then you know that we've been required. So if there's no parent property on the require object, then no, we weren't required. So just to illustrate that, I'll log testing math, and if we run it directly, it tests math. But if we go in, if we're in another Node script and we require math, it doesn't run. Oh, it shouldn't run those tests. Maybe I'm wrong. I thought this worked.
And I should bring it up as like that.
If there is no parent. So maybe I'm wrong. Let's look it up. Node detect, node being required versus executed. How to detect through require or directly on the command line. Okay, here's another way that I've used before. So if require main is this module, then we were the one that was called. What now? Oh, is it module.parent? Oh, thank you. I've seen another way, yeah. Yeah, if there's no module parent. Thank you very much. Great. So if we run it on the command line directly, it runs the tests. If we require it from another file, it doesn't run the tests.
I guess the other
right? So now all of our tests are not having to use a library and a framework, and if they're simple enough, then we can just put them in the bottom of the file here. And if we want to run our tests, we just execute each one of our files, and it runs our tests. Yeah. It's a built-in. In inspect? Nope, just assert. Assert just means if this gets a true, you're good to go. If this gets a false, it'll error with this error message. So you just have to do whatever truthy, falsy evaluations you can do, and assert will either raise or not raise an error. That's all I meant by that. Cool. We have time for function versus function. Okay, so function. This should be pretty vanilla, but the difference here has to do with arrow functions bring two important things. They bring inheritance of this and implicit return. So one of the main reasons you should, okay, you can write an arrow function like this. So we could write add like this. And that gives us implicit return. This is just the end of the expression, right? So we can write short versions like that. This was actually made to do to make this kind of thing nice. This kind of thing nice. Let's say we wanted to add 10 to everything in our array. Yeah? This is a little nice one-liner. It's much nicer than having to say function and curly braces and stuff, right? So if the return value of your single expression, no semicolons, no multiple steps, one step, one operation, if that is an implicit is important to the return of your function, then it's nice to use implicit return like this. However, if you're doing something like where the return value is not cared about, like a callback, right? So fs.readFile whatever, and then a callback that takes error and contents. The return of this is not cared about, but right? Nothing looks at the return for this function, so it would be weird, in my opinion, to do something like a one-liner in here, like, I don't know, yay, right? I think it'd be weird to do that without these curly braces, because console log returns undefined, and so we're not, that's not something that we're like resulting in and returning, right? It's not like this, where this is like a pure function of n comes in and we return n plus 10, right? This is really the only appropriate place where I would avoid curly braces, right? Is it, again, if the return value matters, and you're doing one expression, right? Another place I'll do that is if I'm doing something with promises where I'm going to return the first thing that I do. So I'll do like you know, get users from the database, or how about get user from the database takes a user ID, and we end up just saying like db.select, you know, something like that. If this returns a promise, then I'll write a function just like this, where it's like, okay, get user runs this query, and this thing returns a promise, so this thing should return that same promise. And then even if you wanted to chain on it, right? This is a case where I think it's okay to omit the curly braces, because you're really doing one expression. You're just chaining a bunch of things, but you're really doing one thing, one expression, one operation.
But also omit the parentheses with user ID.
Oh yeah, you could do that too. That's another thing about arrow functions that is a nice thing if you want, is like here I'm omitting the parens because I'm only taking one thing, right? If you're taking nothing, you still need the parens. You can't just do that, right? So that's another place where I would consider omitting these things, but it's actually nice to have them because it's not a lot more. And sometimes when you're debugging, you want to like console log and stuff. So that's another case. But what's the difference between function and arrow function? So here is an example, right? Let's say we have a class. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Right, so we create a robot. Here's one case in which if you're creating a constructor, you cannot use an arrow function to create a constructor. It's not allowed. So you have to use what is not old school function. You have to just the long form version of function, the classic function, right? So then we have robots, prototype, list your parts equals a function. We could make this an arrow function. Yes, hold on. Yes. Yeah, you can. It's just a new syntax. It doesn't replace the old syntax. But I want to, in order for me to show you this example, I need to show you. This is.
It's not like using it to like everything needs. It's just like, oh, these are added features. Use them as you.
I mean, no, but ES6 includes these features. It's not a new set of features. It's not either or, right? ES6 includes the classic function and the classic constructor, right? So these aren't being replaced. Although that's my opinion. That may not be the intention of the ECMAScript panel of deciders or whoever they are. But anyway, that's tangential to this example I'm trying to show you. This robot dot parts equals, I don't know, a leg and a face and a confabulator. Great. And so in here we want to say this dot parts dot for each. So instead of console logging, I'm actually going to say this dot speak, because the robot needs a speak function, right? And we'll just do this to illustrate that. Okay, so here here we have the use of the classic function. Here is the classic function, but here we're using the arrow function, right? And this is an example of one of the main reasons the arrow function was introduced is because the value of this in this context here, inside of this function, is the instance of the robot constructor, right? But inside of the for each function, that's not always true. Here, let me show you the difference here. If I use the old school classic function, right? This, the former example works, and the latter example has a bug because the value of this, when this function runs, is not the same value of this.
Basically this.
Right? So that comes from, that's just how this works in all of JavaScript until we added the arrow function, which has this feature of inheriting wherever it was created, it is permanently bound to that version of this. No, not at all. Let me show you a simpler example. But man, we're running out of time. I don't have time to go into another example. But so another example of where things would break is if I tried to use an arrow function here. Well, no, that technically wouldn't break, but here it would break. If I tried to use an arrow function to define this list your parts function, this would break because when I defined this function, the value of this was probably either nothing or the global object, right? Because the line of code I'm on, when it happens, is I'm just in the plain file, right? So when we get a robot instance and we call .list your parts is bound to a different this, so it won't have access to the robot that we've created, right? Anyway, that'll give you enough to show you that there's a difference there, and there's a lot of stuff to research and watch videos about that. And that's all the time we got for today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.